I've ever walked up here and forgot my Bible before, but anyway, I'm certainly glad to see all of you here today. I'm looking forward to sharing a meal with you after we're done, and I hope that everybody can stay for that. It's one of those very special times when we can just find out a little bit more what's going on in each other's lives and enjoy that blessed fellowship that happens when we can sit down long enough to eat a meal together. I did intend to have slides today, and I am convinced that if I could show you scripture readings on the screen behind me when I allude to them, that maybe you'll get more out of the lesson. And I had hoped to do that, but I've had computer problems, and evidently I'm not quite through. Maybe after today I'll find a way to connect to that projector up there and make that work out. I promise I have given it some hours this week, but still working on it. We're in Hebrews chapter 11, and before we get done, we'll be jumping over into 12 a little bit to tie some ideas together. But I want to read to you this morning from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 through 16. If you have a Bible, I know you'll want to follow along. Please stand for the reading of God's Word from Hebrews 11, 13 through 16. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Amen. Please be seated, and may God's word be a blessing to your life today as we read it publicly. I like to tell people what my theme or big idea is for the lesson, so maybe when they get through they say, well, how did what he said fit into his big idea? Well, my big idea for the lesson then is like the Pilgrims of England who longed for the freedom of the new world, just so are we pilgrims who long for the fulfillment of our own dream, the New Jerusalem. And by the time I get through, I hope that the idea of the New Jerusalem will be a little more dear to you than it was when you came this morning. I don't know about you, but I love watching some of the old westerns, and I don't know why it is John Wayne just doesn't ever get very old to me, but I kind of enjoy it whenever I get to hear him call somebody pilgrim. You know, that's his sort of earmark. And the thought occurred to me, well, what did he mean when he called people pilgrim? And I looked it up on the internet, and here was one answer. To refer to people out west recently arrived from the east, especially when they're soft, timid, and moralizing, values associated with religion rather than the bitter realities of violent frontier life. Now, I don't know who wrote that, but I don't think he was a Christian. And as I think about that word Christian, I am reminded of the fact that the root of that word, if you go back into the English usage of that word, the root denotes a foreigner who's obviously not living where he's from. And so we get that idea when we read Philippians chapter 3 and verse 20, where Paul said, but our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. And so he talks about citizenship being someplace else. And that's maybe a little bit hard if you like the country you live in. I think most Americans do. At least a lot of other people seem to think they would like it if they came here. Well, if you like the country you live in, then it's hard to think of yourself as a foreigner. And yet, this is an idea that I think a Christian, the more mature he becomes, the more he will be able to adopt this attitude of being an actual foreigner here. And so we sing a song. Here we are but straying pilgrims. Here our path is often dim. But to cheer us on our journey, still we sing this wayside hymn, yonder over the rolling river where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our home forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes. Here our feet are often weary on the hills that throng our way. Here the tempest darkly gathers, but our hearts within us say, yonder over the rolling river. Yonder. My grandparents are gone, but I remember as a child, their favorite songs when we went to church were the songs about heaven. And it seemed to me, as my grandmother picked beans in the garden, she would rehearse those great truths of her faith as she sang one song and another from memory. Those were blessed memories, a lot more than the cold dew on my feet as she made me get up and help her pick those beans. But there's a sense of being a pilgrim that we rehearse and we read about in the Bible. And as you begin to think about all of the things that we are promised, one of those promises has to do with one that we can't receive until we've gone on from this life. If I were to ask you the question, what is the most important city in the world? Well, if you went out and asked people in the streets of Memphis or wherever, what is the most important city in the world, probably they would say New York, maybe someplace like Berlin, Germany, or, Moscow, or Tokyo, or Beijing. But to a Christian, it's an easy answer, Jerusalem. In fact, did you know that Jerusalem is the sacred city not only to Christians, but also to Muslims and to Jews? The three monotheistic religions of the world all look to Jerusalem as that most important city. And in my first point, I want to come to Hebrews chapter 12 and take a look at what it says about this mountain. We looked at this a week or two ago. It says in Hebrews 12, beginning in verse 18, you've not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire. And as I read these characteristics, I want you to understand these are the things that they experienced at the foot of Mount Sinai. You can read about them in Exodus chapter 19. And the people were so afraid, they asked Moses to be the intermediary. We don't want to see him because we'll die. And so Moses is their representative. And so the apostle, or whoever, I think it was the Apostle Paul, but that's my impression and maybe not yours. Anyway, the writer of Hebrews is talking about the characteristics of Sinai, and he says, you've not come to a mountain that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. Even if even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion. Different mountain. Not Mount Sinai, not Mount Horeb, but Mount Zion. To the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. To the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all. To the spirits of the righteous made perfect. To Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. And to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. And so here then we see this contrast between these two mountains. And as we look closer at that Mount Zion, we see certainly that it is the location upon which the temple was built. Obviously, it was very close to Calvary. And if you rehearse the things that are going on in Genesis chapter 14, as I mentioned to you a week or two ago, with the sacrifice, or the intended sacrifice of Isaac on the altar, you see that God intervened and Abraham did not have to offer Isaac in sacrifice, but later on, several thousand years later, you would find God himself offering his son on that mountain, and there would be no intervention. And so it mentions that we have come to a heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. Thousands and thousands of angels in joyful assembly. I was present since we lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. My son and I went down to the Washington Mall when the Promise Keepers met out there on the mall, and I was very impressed with the fact that you could hardly find a place to walk across the mall if you weren't on the pathway, the paved pathways. If it was grass, somebody's body was sitting there, and you couldn't, it was so packed. There were so many people. It was an impressive gathering, especially as you learned that people would get on a bus from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they would drive through the night to get there, and they're going to drive through the night to get back home. There was just an impressive gathering, but it will be a much more impressive gathering when thousands and thousands of angels gather in joyful assembly. What is a joyful assembly as opposed to one that's not joyful? I don't know, but I would sure like to experience thousands and thousands of angels gathered in joyful assembly. You've come to the church of the firstborn. Names are written in heaven. You've come to God, the judge of all men. I think that's an interesting phrase, because Jesus said in Matthew 28, verse 18, all authority, both in heaven and on earth, is given to me. And Jesus said in John 5:22, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. And so when it says God, the judge of all men, I assume that's God the Son as opposed to God the Father. You've come to God, the judge of all men. You've come to the spirits of righteous men made perfect. You've come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. You've come to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Why the blood of Abel? Well, because he was the first one whose blood was spilt without his permission, unintentionally, didn't want that to happen, etc. Whereas Jesus' blood was spilt, he entirely walked toward that event through his whole life. And it wasn't like he asked them to do it, but he knew it was going to happen, and he gave himself for that purpose, because it was his blood that would speak a better word, that is, forgiven, a better word than the blood of Abel. We're marching to Zion, we sing. Come, we that love the Lord, and let your joys be known. Join in a song of sweet accord, and thus surround the throne. We're marching to Zion, that hilltop where Jesus was crucified, that hilltop that rehearsed the whole enterprise of forgiveness in the building of the temple and the presence of God, that hill that bespeaks this whole theme of salvation rehearsed in that city, on that mountain. We're marching forward. We embrace the truth in this life, but we're marching toward that ultimate fulfillment of a heavenly Jerusalem. And as you think about a heavenly Jerusalem, you wonder, well, how does that mesh up with a city four square that we sing about? I'm not exactly sure. But you know what? It seems to me that if Moses was shown the pattern for the tabernacle that would be built, and that pattern was what Moses could see, that is the heavenly tabernacle. And you say, well, you mean there's a heavenly tabernacle? Yes, it's described mentioned in Hebrews, where it mentions that the things of that place of worship had to be sprinkled clean with a blood that was better than the blood of bulls and goats, alluding to the sprinkling that was done by Moses as that first covenant was instituted in the Old Testament. And so we see there is Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and then the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. We're marching to Zion. Secondly, I want you to understand there is a history of this city of Jerusalem. It is a history of struggle. Wikipedia mentions this about the history of Jerusalem. It says, throughout its long history, Jerusalem has been destroyed at least twice, besieged 23 times, captured and recaptured 44 times, and attacked 52 times. That is a city of some stress. That is a city that's known hardship. And I want you to know that when the Apostle Paul teamed up with Barnabas at the end of the first missionary journey and was headed back out to begin the second, he said, let's go back through the cities where we went on our first journey and encourage them that through many struggles, we must enter the kingdom. I don't know about you, but I don't like struggles. But I do appreciate that the theme of Jerusalem is surrounded with the idea of struggle. Jerusalem shows up first in Genesis 14 as Abraham is headed toward recapturing Lot and his family from those local kings, Chedorlaomer and the other 4 kings that had a coalition, and they captured Lot and his family and took off with them and all of the spoils of war they could get. And Abraham goes after them, but he stops off in the city of Salem. And, he on his way back, he stops off and he gives Melchizedek, the king and priest, 1/10 of the spoils. And that's an interesting allusion that is talked about to further discussion in the book of Hebrews. But it starts out with the city of Salem. And the word Salem is incorporated in the last half of Jerusalem, that word for peace. And so it starts with the war that happened in the days of Abraham, and then it's mentioned again in Judges 1:8 and Judges 1:21. It mentions that Judah is unable to capture Jerusalem, and then it goes on to say Benjamin is able to settle there. You know, they seem to have succeeded where Judah failed, but the reality was Benjamin's part was outside the city walls. Judah's part was inside the city walls. And so there was a partial claiming of that property, but partially an inability to claim it. It comes to pass again in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, that David takes Jerusalem by storm, gets rid of the Jebusites, and that's his capital. And he moves from Hebron, his old capital city, to Jerusalem. He reigned 7 years in Hebron, and the remainder of his time as king in Jerusalem. And so there's this transition. But then you have all of these sieges and destructions in the Bible that mentions during the days of Rehoboam, the temple and the royal palace are plundered. During the days of Jeroboam, the palace is plundered. During the days of Amaziah, the temple and the palace are looted. During the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the city is destroyed, including the temple. Antiochus IV Epiphanes destroys the city and the temple in 198 and offers a sow on the altar in an affront to the religious sensitivities of the Jews. The Romans destroyed it in 64 or 63 AD and forced their way into the city and destroyed the fortifications, the temple, etc. Hadrian, builds a smaller city in 132 AD. The Jews were kicked out, and the city was renamed Ilia. Constantine comes on the scene in the 4th century and reclaims Christianity with the help of the Byzantine church. The Persians stormed Jerusalem in 614, and is taken again by the Persians shortly thereafter, by the Byzantines, so it didn't stay with the Persians for long. And then the Muslims show up in 637 AD, about 15 years after Muhammad died. Under the leadership of Caliph Omar, Jerusalem becomes part of the Muslim enterprise. In 691, about 70 years later, the Dome of the Rock, that Muslim temple that you can see on the hilltop there where the temple used to stand, that was built in 691. 1099 AD, Jerusalem was captured by the Crusaders, but it didn't last too long. It was 1187, less than 100 years, when Saladin reconquered it as a Muslim capture. And then in 1542, it was once again in the hands of the Egyptians under the leadership of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who rebuilt the city walls as they are seen today. Not a bad set of walls. The Ottoman Turks held Palestine until World War I, when the British troops entered in 1917. It remained under a British mandate until 1948, when it was divided between the Arabs and the Jews. And finally, only a couple of years ago, Jerusalem became the capital of Israel, much to the chagrin of all of the Muslims throughout the world. Well, we see a history of struggle. And we must struggle, and we must endure. For it is through many struggles that we must enter the kingdom. But as you look to the future of Jerusalem, my third main point, you see in Hebrews chapter 12 that there is a heavenly Jerusalem, bearing some similarity in some way to the earthly Jerusalem. There was the original, from which God showed Moses the heavenly tabernacle. And so as you look at Jerusalem, you would have to say, well, yes, there is something that could be patterned after. And so we find this affinity. Revelation chapter 21 describes Jerusalem in this way. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. I don't know about you, but if you have experienced hardship, disappointment, heartache, that message, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, is an attractive message. Jesus said, behold, I go to prepare a place for you. It was a place of preparation, as Jesus, the groom, would be getting ready for his bride, the church. And then here in Revelation, we see this new Jerusalem, the bride, beautifully adorned for her husband. And so God's dwelling place, it says, is now among the people. And he will dwell with them. They will be his people. He will wipe every tear. No more death. No more mourning. No more crying or pain. This last week, I was having kind of a bad day. I guess around Tuesday, I'm not certain. But I was just kind of mad at the world, taking care of business, trying to keep my outward appearance polite, moving through the events of the day, My computer had crashed. I wasn't able to make things happen. I was trying to get a new one. That wasn't coming in. My car lost a transmission. I was going to pay 3/5 the price of the car to get a new transmission put in it. And I was just not a happy camper. Meanwhile, I'm driving through town. Just got notified the guy that wants $3,000 to fix my transmission wants $2,500 of it up front. And I figured, you know what, if I could get $2,500 up front, I just wouldn't do it. I'd just take the $2,500 and leave, you know. And I told him, I said, you're not going to get beat by anybody, are you? He says, well, it costs an awful lot of money to return those transmissions. I said, that's fine, you know, so okay. I'm driving along and I'm listening to this radio program where these two guys every afternoon for about an hour talking about Bible. And they have a good attitude. They know a lot about the Bible. They're not always right, but they're kind of encouraging to listen to, and I enjoy them. And I'm listening to them talk about a thing I've never heard before. They are suggesting that Jesus was present, not incarnate, but pre-incarnate during a lot of the events of the Old Testament. Whereas here's Gideon. No, excuse me. I read about Gideon, but I'm moving on to Samson's parents. The wife, Samson's mother, had gotten this vision of this angel, and Samson's father then prays that he come back. And they talk about this a little more, about what's going to happen with their son when he's born. And so he comes back, and they sit down and they visit, and Samson's father says, I want you to stay here. I want to prepare a meal for you. And so he says, I'll stay. He says, I'm not going to eat it, but I'll stay, and you can use this as an offering. And so an offering was prepared, and all of a sudden, the offering disappears in this flash of smoke, and the angel just straight up into heaven, you know. And, well, it doesn't say it was Jesus, and could it be just a regular angel? Sure. But this guy's suggesting maybe that was Jesus pre-incarnate, or maybe when God appears to Abraham and talks to him about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, and talks in terms of three angels at one point and talks in terms of the Lord at one point, maybe that. And I think, well, this is all very interesting. And then he bypassed my whole cognitive process when he said, but one thing we can know for sure, Jesus is not any further than a prayer away for all of us. Amen. And I thought about that. I thought about him talking about how real Jesus' presence might have been in the Old Testament. And I just swallowed hard, and I thanked God that even in my anger and disgust, I could be reminded that Jesus was present, as he was. And it is simply good news to know that God can be with us, both in this life and in a much richer and fuller way in the next. See to it, after the discussion about the different mountains, the one they've not come to and the one they've come to, listen to this. The Hebrew writer says, see to it. Let me pause for a second. That verb that says see to it, the noun form of that word is the word for bishop or an elder. You know, it's a person in charge. It's a person who's left with a task to make sure it happens. It reminds me of Little Round Top, that hill over there in Pennsylvania, where the Southerners are approaching the hill, and the Northerners are guarding the hill, and that hill is the beginning of a long ridge that gets bigger and bigger as it goes. And the point to get the ridge is at the hill of Little Round Top. And there's this captain school teacher told, you stay here and don't give up this hill under any circumstances. Do you understand? And so they're surrounded, they're totally outnumbered, and they're out of ammunition. And this captain says, fix bayonets and charge. And all of a sudden these guys are charging with bayonets, and they put the Southerners to the run. And I think that's not the time to run. But they held the hill. And it's an amazing story. And as you begin to think about this point of entry, you know, we all are able to be given the challenge to see to it. That captain was told, see to it that the hill is not taken. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we, if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken. That is, created things. So that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Don't give up. Don't forget your charge. Finish what you started when you began walking the path of righteousness. The promise can be yours, and it can be very real if you'll walk that path and if you'll see to it. Are you seeing to it? If you're not, you need to start while we stand and sing.